Today we have a very special guest. We have Anthony Greenfield, who is a veteran solopreneur and also a specialist in change management. I think he's got a lot to share, a lot of value to bring, and it will be worth your while drinking from his fountain of wisdom. So, Anthony, welcome to soloSei. Welcome as a soloSei legend. And we are looking forward to hearing from you. So maybe start with your story. When did you become a solopreneur and how did you become a solopreneur?
Yes. Well, I'll give a bit of background, Willem. Thank you very much. But so many moons ago, I finished my physics PhD and decided that that was not the life for me. So I joined Accenture. It wasn't called Accenture in those days, but it was the sort of classic in those days consulting work. It was all big IT systems, and it was my learning ground in terms of being a consultant, I suppose. Major projects. I ended up, fortunately, in South Africa, working out of Johannesburg, doing a lot of work with the railways there, the electric company there. And that was a fantastic experience for me because being able to prove yourself in another country gives you a great deal of confidence, I would say. Plus, things there, as you probably know, Willem, far more entrepreneurial. And in fact, I joined a company over there, which was called Discovery Health, but some people might know it now as Vitality Healthcare Insurance. But it was more than that. It was a real startup, real entrepreneurial company. And that's where I really got a taste for this idea of not being part of a corporate, but doing my own thing or having more control over, what I did. So that was a bit of a turning point. So when I came back to the UK, I wanted to join a small consulting firm. I was interviewed by the big ones and I just thought, no, I've been here and done this. I've been part of the machine. And that was really useful. A startup company in Leeds in Yorkshire in the north of England. Started with just a handful of us and grew to 80 plus. Worked a lot in retail, did big overhaul of Sainsbury's, the big supermarket chain, in terms of their entire supply chain. So that was a major piece, and worked with Marks and Spencer's, but also started working with financial services companies. And that was a lot around performance improvement. But all the while, I've been developing my skills at Accenture as a change manager, somebody who understood change. Well, and certainly in those old days, nobody really understood change. And I still don't think they do entirely now. But nevertheless, that was my kind of passion area. I sort of liked the psychology behind it, the idea of dealing with people and not with IT systems and processes so much, but the whole thing around how do you get hearts and minds all pointing in the same direction. So I left consulting companies, should I say, 20 years ago. So I've been a sole entrepreneur for 20 years. And it's been a great time. It's also been a tough time because when you're your own boss, you're probably the worst boss in the world. And you've got to be careful of that because you can push yourself too hard. But as a sole entrepreneur, then one of my reasons was I actually wanted to write a book about organizational change because I always felt that things were very much on the surface. There was a lot of formulas for how you're supposed to do change. You do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And the reality is it's nothing like that. You're dealing with human beings, psychology, and emotion. So I wanted to, and I'll put my first advert in, I wrote this book called The Five Forces of Change, which is really based on human psychology. And that was the thing partly that drove me to become a sole entrepreneur. And I then sort of discovered, I suppose, one of the key sort of ideas, tips, or strategies for being a sole entrepreneur is it's your network. And I was fortunate. I had a long background in consulting. I had a number of previous clients that trusted in me. So I worked with Vitality, so that South African company that came into the UK. They wanted help in getting started in the UK. So I immediately had a consulting client, which I have to say was very helpful because it gives you a sort of a soft landing. But then I went back to my, old clients, Marks and Spencer's, a great client of mine, had left and joined a company in a US banking company, and they were struggling with a post-acquisition integration. And, this is another theme of really being a sole entrepreneur is it's networking, but that's kind of too simple a way of putting it. It's really about gaining trust, long-term trust. And there's a book that some of you might be interested in, and it's called The Trusted Advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yes.
aimed at consultants, but when you're a sole entrepreneur, then really you are a consultant of in some shape or form. Whatever it is you're doing, you're trying to build relationships. Funny enough, a lot of consulting is about building trust and building relationships. So I suppose a theme that I'm quite interested in terms of working for yourself as a solo entrepreneur then is this idea of trust and building a network. So I ended up working for this US based banking company called Northern Trust because I worked for this guy at Marks and Spencer's. And at Marks and Spencer's, it was all around a training strategy and a change of process and getting everybody on board and aligning them in the right direction. But it was in a retail environment, whereas this was post-acquisition integration in a financial services company. And it kind of underlines this idea if somebody trusts you and you build trust with them because they see you do a number of things, that you're reliable, that you deliver, but you also build a relationship with them,
Yeah.
then they'll pull you in to do anything really. So that's sort of where you're aiming for. And that for me, when I reflected back over the years, in my sort of last 20 years, it's really been about networking.
And I suppose that the trust theme is not only about clients, it's also about collaborators. I mean, you've worked with some big brands, big
Mm,
organizations with thousands and
mm,
thousands of team members.
yes.
And to deliver on these projects, quite often you have to bring in other resources and other partners and collaborators to work with you,
Yes.
which is also a very trust-based exercise, especially for solopreneurs. Talk to me a little bit about that, how you've built that network and how do you work with your
Mm.
collaborators?
Yes, I think I didn't like the idea of networking when I first sort of started out because it's a lot of sort of standing in rooms, holding a drink and a sandwich at the same time, trying to talk to people about what you do and explain what organizational changes, which doesn't always go very well. But actually, the network is those kind of relationships, as you say, that you've built up over time. So people I'd worked with in my consulting life, I subcontracted them in later days because I knew them. I knew how good they were. I knew that I could rely on them. If I just pointed them in the right direction, they would just make stuff happen. So that's one aspect of it. But then I was fortunate enough to join a network of, if you like, self-employed consultants. And I met a couple of guys through that. And we started working together, collaborating. They have their own businesses. They had their own limited companies. But one of these guys called Howard, I brought him into Northern Trust, and then I met Nick, and essentially we worked together for about the last 15 years. Not
Oh,
continuously, but pretty much so.
that's
And
incredible.
it's a moment to reflect on what was that all about? Why did that work? I think we had common set of values. I think we were more interested in the work than in the money. We made money, but it was more about doing great things and doing interesting things and doing things together. And I just found we had complementary skills. I learned vast amounts from them, and hopefully they learned something from me.
Yeah.
So that was been a real rock, I think. And we've sort of brought each other into different clients over many years. So working with the likes of Royal Mail, working more recently with Jaguar Land Rover,
Hmm.
I don't think I'd have ever done all of that on my own. And they also realize that, you get called into Royal Mail, they've got over 100,000 employees. I mean, even with four of us, which was a tiny team,
Yeah.
it was just, you could never have achieved that with one person. And I think it's also one of the things people struggle with, particularly if they moved out of a corporate job, is to basically have people that they can actually trust and rely on as a sort of a team, even if it's in the loosest kind of possible sense. So collaboration is massive with those people that I know and trust and have trusted over the years. And we've built that trust and we enjoy each other's company and we have a laugh and we've sort of managed some pretty difficult times.
Yeah.
Clients can be very, very hard at times. It's good to have somebody you can kind of share that with. And then there's
And
collaboration with the client themselves as well, which is another important arena.
practically, when you have a big client, there's a lot riding on it, and you have to bring in some additional resources. How do you manage that? How do you actually make sure that the people that you bring in
Mm.
are reliable and they're going to deliver on what you promised your client?
Yes, I mean it is a tricky one. And I must say, always taken, if you like, the easy route. It's people that somehow we've encountered over the years, even client people. There was one guy we worked very closely with at Jaguar Land Rover. He was a former employee of Jaguar Land Rover. He'd left. We knew about him. We knew about his reputation. We'd done some work with him. So he was an obvious candidate. But then we started doing some work in North America, and a guy that I hadn't worked with for maybe 15 years even, always kept in touch with him over LinkedIn, and there was a bit of back and forth, irregular, but I got hold of him and one of his mates who also worked. We all worked for the same small consulting firm based in Leeds, and you just knew that if they could survive in that environment, they were going to be able to work and survive and do well. And they'd set up their own businesses as well. And I thought, well, if they can do that, then they've got it what it takes. But he and I, particularly, when we sort of worked, kind of together, running workshops with leaders in Jaguar Land Rover, it was relatively easy because I just felt that we knew each other so well and we'd had some similar experiences. So that is probably the kind of one of the easiest ways of doing it. Or people who are really trusted by people you trust. Bring
Good.
those people in as well. I mean, obviously, you want to interview them and you want to chat to them and you want to see what their background and experience is and their understanding of the world and how
Mm.
they deal with clients, because
Yeah.
you've got to have had that experience of dealing with clients and building trust with clients and knowing that it's a conversation and it's a relationship. And those are the kind of guys that, always brought in and always did the magic because you haven't got a huge amount of time to manage anybody, or you've got to be able to feel that they're a piece of the jigsaw and they'll kind of slot in
Yes.
relatively easily.
So over the time, you built up this reputation, you built up long-term relationships. There's actually a specific story that you shared before about Marks and Spencer. Uh,
Oh, yes.
Please
Yes.
tell us that story. I think it's a fantastic
Yeah, I always
anecdote.
think of this story, I must say, when we're talking about trust and relationships. So this guy's called Andrew. I won't give you his last name, but he was our client at Marks and Spencer's, and we'd done some, I'd like to say, some great work. Well, actually, won a national training award, so it must have been decent. And I guess we helped him, we collaborated with him, but we also made him look good. We basically built a strategy around a new academy for Marks and Spencer's, which was a big deal because they were changing the way they were doing things. And it was all about getting everybody aligned to the strategy. So he loved us because we made him look good to his boss and his boss's boss. And one day I was walking up the stairs, which are actually sort of on the side of the building in this strange sort of glass bubble. And he was coming the other way. And he said to me, Anthony, what do you know about post-acquisition integration in the banking industry? And you're like, okay. Nobody asked you that question just out of, sheer interest. So I'm like, well, I do know a bit, yes. And I've got some colleagues who probably know a lot more, but yeah, that would be great to talk to you about that. Oh, he said, oh, I've got a friend who's joining a bank and they're having trouble with their post-acquisition integration. Okay, lock that one away. And then a few weeks later, he resigned from Marks and Spencer's and joined the bank because, funnily enough, his friend was him. And because we'd done, some great work with him, he called us in to do post-acquisition integration. And frankly, I'd never done that before, but obviously I understood enough about change, I understood enough around people. And we went in there and we found that they, created a bit of a mess, as people often do when they acquire new businesses. And that relationship then just grew and grew. So we did that. And then a couple of years down the line, we did a huge leadership program, completely different piece. They're high potential leaders. We did an 18-month program for them in several cohorts, all going through the same program for a year and a half. It was a huge piece, and it was all done over in Chicago. And none of that would have happened if, maybe on the stairs I sort of said, oh, and nothing to do with me, mate. I can't do that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But the truth is, clients look for low risk solutions.
Yeah.
And for them, the biggest risk is bringing some new character into their organization, maybe with a whole team of their own people. And if they think, well, this guy, I trust this guy, I know he's going to do a good job. He may not be an expert in this area in particular, but I just know it's a low risk option to bring him in.
It's a great story, and I relate to that as well, because when you build a relationship with somebody and they know that you will kind of make something work, whatever comes, that trust outweighs their confidence in your technical skill, because they know they can give you something that maybe is not 100% in your wheelhouse, but you're going to make it work. And
Yes.
as a solopreneur, especially as a consultant, I think that is probably your most significant business development asset over time.
Yeah, ultimately they do buy people. You are your brand. If they don't trust that brand, we see all these big brands and sometimes they make horrendous mistakes and they kill the brand off. So, maintaining your brand. And a thing that sort of strikes me maybe in terms of a tip is one thing I teach, so I teach consulting skills as well, is around this idea of when you're with your client, it may be an executive who you don't often have much time with. That's kind of your golden moment. So you have to really prepare for that meeting. Even if they haven't prepared for it, you have to say, right, what's this meeting all about? Well, yes, we need to exchange information. We need stuff from them. They need stuff from us. And maybe we want to move the process forward so that we're saying, let's move. What do we need to do now to finish phase 1? And what do we need to do to, sign up for phase 2 and all of that good stuff. But the third string in all of that, which is the most important, is the relationship. If you go in to those kind of meetings and you see it as a transaction, I'm going to tell them this and explain that, and they're going to and ask them a load of questions. What you're missing is the relationship building. This idea that this person is a human being and they have specific needs. If you start to understand what are your personal ambitions within this organization, it may be to get to a certain level and leave. That's fine, because if you leave, hopefully you take us with you as client. But it's about asking those questions, looking around you when you go into their office is a classic. What are the pictures up on the wall? Ask about the family. Don't be shy. Ask about fishing, because they've got a big picture of them holding a big fish, and just break it down so that it becomes a human relationship, not this kind of work relationship. And you have to keep that, but it sounds a bit kind of cold-blooded, but really, people want to create connections and want to be able to trust you and build a relationship. So you've got to give them that space, create some space to think about them as an individual as well as, an executive within a particular organization. Where do they want to get to? What is their political agenda potentially as well?
And I think together with this, in this kind of evolution of AI and everything technology, I really think that people's craving for more human interaction will probably just grow. So your skill as a solopreneur to be able to relate to people at a more personal level, whether that's online, remote, or whether that's in person, one-on-one, probably will play more and more of a big role and be a key thing for you to unlock opportunities, build long-term relationships, and repeat business opportunities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, AI, we don't know what's going to happen, but ultimately the thing that's going to distinguish you is that you're not AI, that you're somebody who can
Exactly.
go out for a drink with somebody or share a story or an anecdote. And, ultimately we are social animals and we need
Yeah.
that kind of connection.
Anthony, you also wrote a very successful book, the Five Forces of Change. And I want you to talk a little bit about the role of content like this in positioning yourself as a thought leader, positioning yourself as a trusted advisor, and how have you used that to build your career and success as a solopreneur?
Yes. And the book, it's not a way of making money.
Yeah,
It's a lot of hard work in writing it, but what it does give you is credibility and a kind of an entryway. So, for example, I do some lecturing in organizational change and change leadership at Leeds University Business School, and I would never have got that gig without having some sort of background, without having written a book that gives you some level of credibility. So that is another sort of string to my bow in terms of being able to do these university and business school lectures. Like that in turn then builds your credibility even further because that's then on your CV. So when you're doing training or other things, people kind of have that sense of gravity.
yeah,
So yes, it sort of opens doors. I've spoken at conferences as well. You then get that exposure, talking at conferences, explaining the framework for change that's within that book, and really just sort of creating your presence both sort of publicly but also online in terms of building your website, in terms of what you do on LinkedIn. So I do a lot of posting around the five forces of change on LinkedIn. I do that as a regular thing, and that kind of raises your profile. But again, it reminds people who already know you that you're still out there. And I had that just this week. This guy sort of came out of the woodwork and said, "Oh, hi, Anthony. I think I need to get you on our suppliers list." And he changed jobs twice since
fantastic,
I last did anything for him. And he saw a post of mine, and then he's like, you're still around, aren't you? We're going to need some change leadership training. Send me your details and I'll put you on the suppliers list." That's a big win.
great,
Those things are important, and you never quite know. The thing about selling in these situations is it can be a very long game, a very, very long game. So I remember the initial meeting with Marks and Spencer's was 18 months before they suddenly had an opportunity to invite us in to bid for the work.
sure. I guess for solopreneurs, it's also important to balance their sales pipeline with, on the one hand, you have to build these long-term relationships, keep
Mm,
your eye on a long-term big prize, and then balance this with some short-term opportunities that keep the cash flowing and pay the bills
yes.
and keep you going.
Yes, I think this idea of having variety, so having a number of strings to your bow, so that, I mean, for many years, I've subcontracted to some training companies teaching strategy development, teaching organizational change, and that sort of comes up reliably. And I can't quite turn it up and turn it down as I'd like to, but it's there as a kind of a steady beat of income. There's the work at the university. There was work for another company as an associate teaching consulting skills. So those things would pop up over time, and they would provide, if you like, a kind of a base income
Yeah,
that was kind of reliable. But then these enormous projects started to come along, and to be honest, didn't have too many gaps, which is very fortunate. But that is one of the hardest things about being a solo entrepreneur is keeping. You'd love to have this kind of steady income, which you don't have. So you need a few strings to your bow so that you can pull on different things and you can have different sources of income.
Anthony, as a solopreneur, I'm sure it hasn't always been just plain sailing. What has been your toughest obstacle to overcome, and how did you do it?
Yes, well, I think there's a couple of things. So I'll take Jaguar Land Rover as an example. We were working with their franchise companies. Their dealerships actually are separate companies, and they have to deal with Jaguar Land Rover. So they saw us as this sort of part of this big global organization that made their life difficult, shall we say, to be polite. And so we would come in, and there was always like a barrage of people venting, complaining about this and complaining about that. And after a while, you sort of learn to live with that, this idea of venting. Particularly, I did something with Southwest Water. We sat down with a load of managers. We were going to do some interesting stuff about change and getting them aligned and helping them lead the change. And we often start by sitting in a big circle, and there must have been 20 or 30 people there. And we just started off with, conversationally, where are we now as an organization? Where do we want to be? And we had maybe an hour and a half of people telling us about all the terrible things that had happened over the last 20 years. And me and this colleague, we sat through it, we listened, we asked questions, we wrote things down. And only then, once they'd managed to kind of clear all of the sort of problems and lay them on our shoulders, even though we clearly said we were an outside organization, they laid every problem about their company in front of us and sort of aimed at us. And you sort of learn to become resilient. You've opened up the sort of Pandora's box and all the bad stuff comes flying out. And I guess, I was once in the situation again with another colleague, and it was a Jaguar Land Rover, and things were going badly wrong. Well, they weren't going badly wrong, but they'd set us up so badly to run this particular workshop with these guys about changing the way they did customer service and changing the way they ran their dealerships. And we were right in the midst of it. And my colleague was like, looked at me and he was like, what are we going to do? Like, should we just back up and go? And I just said, no, trust in the process. And I think that's something you sometimes have to remember when you're facing extreme difficulty. You keep following your process. You trust in what you're doing, and that eventually people will just sort of calm down, and then they'll look at you, and then they'll suddenly start to think, this guy is serious, he's credible, he's not putting up with our usual bullshit. And then after a while, they click. We used to have classically it happened in these workshops. Day 2, they came in very differently to day 1. Day 1, they were on their phones literally during these workshops. And then day 2, they'd had a time to reflect, and they came back and went, okay, you've got my attention now. What's this all about? And I think this is this credibility building. Every time we went into a different dealership, slowly the word got out there, and the credibility was built before we arrived. But I think that's the toughest thing. We have something called the Jedi mind trick. It wasn't.
Oh, yeah.
It was a client who coined the phrase. I don't know if people are Star Wars fans, but there's a thing called the Jedi mind trick where you get somebody to change their mind. And he said he came running up to us once, and he'd been in front of the exec board, and he was pitching for an expansion of the program. And he came back and he was so excited, and he said, I've done it. I've got the budget. We're going to spread this out across the whole company.
Mm-hmm.
He said, and we said, well, how did you do that? Because we were quite surprised. We thought he was going to get eaten alive. And he said, oh, I used the Jedi mind trick, your Jedi mind trick. And we're like, what's that? And then we realized he'd understood what it was that we were doing. And what we always have done is we've never gone in with PowerPoint slides and told people what to do. We've always gone to the front line. We've always asked lots of questions. We've always understood stuff. But then we've always helped people see the big picture, helped people make up their own minds for themselves, always collaborated with them, but got them to the point where they made up the mind for themselves. So when this guy had pitched with the board, he didn't go in and say, bang, I've done all the analysis and this is what we need to do. He said, here's the analysis, here's the information. This is where we're trying to get to. How should we proceed? Here's some options. What do you think? And particularly executives, this works very well with them, is you never tell them what to do because that's their job.
That's
They've
very
got
true.
big egos.
Yes.
You put something on the table, even if it's blindingly obvious that option 3 is the best option. You allow them the space to think about it, to process your analysis and make the best decision possible. And they'll always pick option 3. That's the thing you've got to trust. They'll never pick option 1 or option 2 because they're sentient beings. They understand business. They understand where
Yeah.
they're trying to get to. And it's
Yeah.
the same with managers and even people on the front line. If you give them the honest truth and you give them the information, you give them a little bit of space to think about it and make up their own minds, then they go and do stuff. They don't fight you because you haven't set up a fight. If you say, do this and this and this, you will get the normal human reaction. This is why it won't work. We tried it before. All the other things.
So
That's it.
you've had some obstacles to overcome, but I'm sure you've also had some major triumphs. Tell us about what's your biggest triumph, the thing that you're most proud of? How did you get there?
One of the things that made me most proud, I suppose, was when I was doing the work with Sainsbury's supply chain. And I think we cracked it. Originally, we went in there as a bunch of consultants. We know what's best and this is how you do it. And that got us so far, doing the sort of fighting the resistance and pushing through. What we then did, though, which was the massive breakthrough, was we trained all of the managers, all the senior buyers, all the senior technicians, all the people within the supply chain, how to do what we did, which was how to effectively improve efficiency, look for opportunities, do things differently, make action plans up and execute on them. And that changed the whole game. It was them doing it for themselves. And there's a bit of a theme in this. And we won the National Training Award for that. And one of the
Wow.
things that obviously was great was that, these guys come in and they talk to your client and the people within the client and they say, how are these guys operating? It's not all just, not all just sort of made up stuff that they put in a proposal, but actually it's
Yeah.
real.
Yeah.
And it was lovely, being able to go to an award ceremony and receive an award and do all of that sort of fun stuff.
So, Anthony, we want to go into some of the specific skills for solopreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you first around sales. So this is typically one of those skills that a lot of solopreneurs they're very good at what they do. They're good at their craft, but they struggle to make sales. They struggle to win new clients. And you've obviously over 20 years learned a lot and you've done this successfully. I'd like you to help with some practical tips. Let's start with, how do you start conversations with a potential new client?
That's that's a big question. With a potential new client, quite often you're coming across them through a connection usually. I tend to do that. I think it's very rare to find a new client in our situation from cold calling. When you're having conversations with clients for the first time, the key is questions. Always questions and asking questions and showing interest in what they do. It's very easy to get into that sort of broadcast mentality. I need to tell them all of the great things that I've done. And that's really not going to work. That's just going to bounce straight off them. So
Very
you ask them
important.
about their business, and then you ask them another question. You ask them, well, so how, what's your biggest challenges right now? And they start to tell you about that. And then you can dig a bit deep. Okay, that's interesting. You say that about the supply chain. You might then say, oh, well, I had a client that was in a similar situation and they did this and this and this. And I say, oh, that's interesting. Or you just dig a bit deeper and ask them, so what's that costing you? What's the impact of those problems you're having in your supply chain? And then they start to verbalize the pain. That's interesting. So how's that affecting your employees? Oh, well, we have a lot of stress. We have a high turnover of people. Okay, so what if you could turn that situation around? What would it do for the organization? Oh, well, I could focus less on firefighting. I could focus more on strategy. I could do this and this and this. So you're starting to create this idea of, or helping them to crystallize the problem and then start to crystallize the solution. And all you're doing is asking questions. And people make jokes about consultants. They don't tell you anything. They just ask you a load of questions and then, charge you for the privilege.
Yeah.
But a funny thing happens in reality is they go, that guy was brilliant. Because somehow he made me crystallize the problem, crystallize the impact, and start to crystallize the solution. This guy knows what he's talking about. And you've never once said to them, listen, I'm an expert in supply chain, and this is what happens. You can tell them stories about clients and things that have happened in the past to you and people that you've worked with and things that you've done, but you don't want to be pushing that button too hard. That's got to come up as sort of a side issue. Or if they ask you the question, what have you done? That's a great sort of insight. That now they're starting to buy from you, if you like. But just ask them questions, be curious, be interested, write down what they say if that's the sort of scenario that you're in. Because the more you ask, it's been proven scientifically as well with salespeople, that the people who got the most sales were the ones that asked the most questions and said the least.
Very true. I've always said to my sales associate, if you want to look clever, don't try to look clever. You have to ask smart questions. And by asking smart questions, you create that perception of, what you need to ask. And also when the client feels that you understand their problem better, they are more likely to trust the solution that you are offering. If you haven't taken the time to understand their problem, how would they trust your solution? So yes, thank you.
Absolutely. Yes. So I think that is particularly important for you as an individual operator. And I think that it just crosses so many boundaries in terms of, if you want to be a great leader, ask great questions. I had a colleague who sort of said, well, the older and wiser I get, the less I say and the more I get paid.
I like
Which
that.
is a good shorthand.
Yes.
But you always see these CEOs, when the CEO arrives in a factory or a plant or a new office or whatever, they just ask a few questions and people go, oh my God, he got right to the heart of all of our issues. Never said a word, just asked questions about, I'm looking at this. Tell me about this, this factory line. What are the issues? I go, da, 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 da. And mentally they think, he knew all along. He asked that clever question because he knew what our problems were in the first place. He's a genius,
Yes.
That's why he's the boss.
That's great advice.
It's,
Thanks.
interesting human psychology, really.
If we move on to the serve quadrant of our skills framework, a lot of solopreneurs are, they're good at what they do. They are good at sales. They maybe, get the clients in, but then they drop the ball when they have to deliver. So let's move on a little bit. One of the things that I know you are very good at, and you've learned this, of course, over time, is the ability to set boundaries or say no. Give us some tips on how you do that, and without, getting clients to be angry at you or disappointed in your boundaries.
Well, I think it sort of starts with something else right at the sort of the start of the relationship, is creating the scope, understanding and helping the client understand what they are getting and being very specific in terms when you're what we would call contracting with them. It's not so much a formal contract, but certainly it's an explanation of this is what we're going to do for you and this is what we're not going to do for you. And a colleague of mine also had a good phrase, which is no surprises. So we don't want any surprises. We don't want to set ourselves up with the wrong expectations. That's where it goes horribly wrong, is you set up the wrong expectations. Then after that, you set the expectations, you deliver. So you deliver what you're going to, what you say you're going to deliver, and you do it at the time, or you at least through your communications explain why there's going to be a delay. But the interesting thing is, as a sole entrepreneur, your temptation is, I'm going to deliver above and beyond anything that they ever expected. Well, that is great and it's nice, and a lot of organizations say, we're going to make our customers even more happy than they ever expected. That's nice too. But as soon as you do that, you've just raised the bar for yourself. So now they know that if they come up to you partway through the program, say, well, can you just do something else for us? There's another piece that actually needs fixing and doing. And that's the point at which you have to sort of say, well, that's great. We would love to do that, but we have to come back to, our original contract, which didn't quite cover that. So let's have a conversation about how that would work. But it's not part of what it is that we set out to do and we agreed that we would do. Yeah. And saying no to a client does a couple of things. One is it means you don't land yourself with a load more work that you're not going to get paid for. But two is it creates what some people term an adult-to-adult relationship. Some clients think you're there because they're paying you, you'll do anything that they tell you to do. As soon as you say no, like, no, I can't be at that meeting because I have something else to do, or no, we can't do that because it's not part of the scope, or we can do that, but we would have to take something else out of the scope to make it possible within the time frame that we've agreed together. That makes them take a step back and say, well, this guy's not here at our beck and call. He won't do everything we say when we say it just because we've changed our minds on a whim. He's a grown-up, I'm a grown-up. We can have this conversation of equals. People who are sort of people pleasers or happy helpers, they just want to make the client happy, which of course you do. But no surprises is the thing that you help them with. They know once they've agreed something, you will deliver it. Can't deliver it on time. You've communicated that very early on in the process. So you're trying to minimize that risk sense. They don't want to hear at the last minute that you can't deliver.
Yeah. That also segues good into the next one, communication.
Yes.
I mean, sometimes things go wrong, and communication is so essential to make sure that somehow you rescue stuff and somehow you ensure a long-term relationship. How do you manage that?
Yes, and I think as again, the research will tell you that customer recovery is a big deal. If you upset a client or something goes wrong and you manage to recover the situation and sort of take responsibility and turn it around, actually you create greater loyalty because you sort of fessed up and you've done something about it. But communication is key. It comes back to the no surprises. It means be open about where you're at and what's happening and what's not happening and the reasons behind it. Quite often it's because of something inside their own organization that's holding the whole thing up and decisions haven't been made and so on and so forth. But you have to be clear when you're updating them that, there are various reasons and that's why things may be going to arrive later or differently, or there's different ways to deliver on what you actually are there to do. Maybe you have to de-scope it if you want to hit that deadline, but offer them some choices. Never leave them surprised. Don't surprise them by doing more than you said you were going to do, and don't surprise them by doing less you're going to do unless you've had that kind of communication. And that's absolutely key. Like I said before, those meetings you have with senior clients are sort of your golden moments. So you have to prepare completely thoroughly for them, because that's when they might drop in that suddenly, one of the finance department could really do with a restructure.
Yeah.
They need some of what you're doing over there. And that's a sales opportunity. That's immediately, they're offering you something up, telling you something for a reason. So communication is vital. Asking questions is vital. The more you dig in, the more you'll learn. You'll learn some surprising stuff. Why do people behaving this way? And there's some historic reason that you haven't quite got to. And then suddenly, I remember being in an area, a new function within Sainsbury's. It was all about building new facilities and stuff. And I'd been told, go and speak to this guy because, they could do with some help. And I'm sitting there and I'm about 45 minutes into this meeting. I'm thinking, this guy is telling me absolutely nothing. He doesn't.
Yeah.
And then suddenly he said, oh, have I told you about the mezzanine floor story? No, you haven't. And he told me this whole story about a complete screw up in building this massive building and putting this mezzanine floor in there. It's like, here we are at last. I can see the problem about lack of coordination, lack of communication, etc., etc., etc. So you never know what's coming down the track, and that's where communication is so important. You don't know, you don't know what you don't know. Again, as a colleague of mine would say, it was the old Donald Rumsfeld many years ago when there was a war, said, we went in there and we didn't know what we didn't know. Just, there are things you are ignorant of, so you've got to be curious the whole time. So you've also got to be good at explaining your position as well. Correct, so that they feel that level of confidence in you.
Okay, so when it comes to retaining clients or get repeat business from clients, what practical tips do you have for solopreneurs?
Yes. Well, you have to have a different attitude to the work, or you need to see the work in a bigger frame. So don't see the work as, we're going to do this project, it's going to be delivered, and then we're going to move on. It is part of a chain. So this links back to selling. Again, a former colleague of mine said, sell them the link, don't sell them the chain. If you can get into an organization to do, quotes, a piece of discovery work or a proof of concept piece, maybe relatively small in the scheme of things, but it comes all the way back to trust again. If you can go in there, do a small piece of work for them, do it brilliantly, make them really happy, that's the starting point. But you've got to have in your mind that this is not just a one-off engagement, that there are more opportunities out there. So, as I said, as you're having these conversations, don't just talk about the project, don't just talk about the deliverables, don't just talk about all the good stuff that you're doing to make this thing happen. Build a relationship with them, find out what's important to them, and try and figure out, kind of what the next piece is and the next piece after that. Because the people that you can sell to are people who already know you and already trust you. You don't have to put through massive proposals. You put in a letter of, agreement or something that says, this is the next bit that we're going to do. So have that mentality. And then even after you leave, they'll still, they remain potential clients. And that's why this sort of continuous communication, it can be posting on LinkedIn, it can be whatever. The marketing guys understand this. They know that you don't sell a product by a big splashy campaign and then everyone sort of stops. It's this drip feed over time, because you don't know when the need is going to arise. You need to be in their consciousness. They need to know that you're still around. So when that moment comes and they go, oh yes, I need these managers. We're about to do a massive restructure. They've no idea how to get, lead people through change. We need this guy in because we know he knows all about this and he can help them do that. All of these things interlink, funnily enough. The more you talk about them, it is about trust, but it's about a different sort of mental model, because if you're a technical expert, you say, well, I became an engineer or a software engineer or an expert in chemistry. Those are the things I love to do and I can do them really well. But I also want to be the solo entrepreneur. I hate selling. I don't want to sell because selling is about telling lies to people to try and convince them to buy something they don't actually want or don't actually need. You're not in that business at all. You're in the business of meeting a real need and adding some real value. So the idea is that, whenever you're, in quotes, selling, it's because you're just meeting a need.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, personally, I've also been in that space where I kind of told myself that, I don't really like selling. I'm not in business for the sales fun. I want to make clients happy. And then, over time, I've shifted my mindset to say, hang on, it's not about selling. It's about being passionate about solving problems for people. And if you're having that conversations from that perspective of, I want to understand what's going on in your environment. I want to understand how I can support. I want to design and be creative about making solutions. That changed it completely for me. And it changed it to actually a really fun process.
Yes, and if I can get my client promoted in the same, at the same time, or get them a better job in another company, that's everyone wins.
Anthony, thank you. Do you have a quote that inspires you, that you go back to and say, this is the thing that picks me up?
I think, well, I'll bring my book back out again.
Yes.
By Positive Change. At the beginning, I thought, at the beginning of each chapter, there's a quote, because there's a lot of wisdom out there. One of the ones that's probably my favorite is by the guy that wrote, I think, The Art of War, an ancient Chinese philosopher, and he just said, a leader has succeeded in their job when the people say, we did it ourselves. So they think, they have that feeling that somehow we all did this together, we did it ourselves. It wasn't because of some brilliant leader, but the leader has enabled them, has helped them get to the position, has created the environment where they can be successful. And I think that has
Great.
a lot of resonance with me.
And it's a nice tie back to what we started this conversation with, is you as a solopreneur, you are still a leader and you still need to lead the vision of a solution. You still need to work with other people to deliver on what your client needs. And even more so as a solopreneur, because you don't have the kind of the authority of a boss. You have to lead with a much more collaborative mindset and empowering mindset to get things done together. So thank you for that.
I totally agree.
So from my side, Anthony, it's been an absolute pleasure. There's been so many amazing pearls of wisdom, which I think will help other solopreneurs a lot. So guys, those of you who have been listening to this, I'm sure a lot of solopreneurs are in a position where you actually have to deliver projects, and a lot of these projects actually involve change. So if you have a change component to a big project, Anthony is your guy. Reach out to him. We will put his LinkedIn details in the YouTube channel where this will be published as well, so you can find it there, connect to him, and also buy his book. It's a very fascinating book, helping you to understand what makes up change, how change actually happens. And for you as a solopreneur, when you deliver projects that need change, I think it would be very useful. So thank you, Anthony, much appreciated. And your contribution as a soloSei legend will live in our space. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Willem. That was lovely.